So welcome to our Everything Marketplaces community workshop today, which is going to be part 3 of 3 for the Marketplace SEO workshop and deep dive series that we've been doing. So today is going to be covering technical SEO in more detail. So I'm really excited to have Mike Heijden join us again. And once again, he's led our previous workshops with us and is definitely a top mind when it comes to Marketplace SEO. Also, these are 25-minute presentations followed by a group Q&A. So if you have any questions, just post them in the Zoom chat. Then you can also use the Zoom raise hand functionality, so that way you know to call on you during the group Q&A. So with that said, thanks again for joining us here today, Mike, and leading this workshop. And I'll just actually let you just take it over from here.
Sounds awesome, Mike. Awesome to be back. So today, I hope you've all had your cup of coffee. Typically not as sexy, but the technical stuff really does matter a lot, especially when it comes to marketplaces, right? So I'll just quickly go through who I am, right? So I think everyone's seen the slide. I've been in the SEO industry for 17 years. Got a reminder to update it to 18 years next year. Founder of Portal Ventures. So we primarily do SEO for online marketplaces, both on equity basis and sort of typical agency basis. Angel investing in a bunch of marketplaces and strategic investor in strategic advisor, I should say, in a couple of other marketplaces like Flipper and Luxury Escapes. So today's agenda, thank you all very much, obviously, for all of your questions that you've submitted. I think, we could be sitting here for hours if I was to answer every single one. So what I did was I went through all the questions. I went through sort of the last sort of 20 or 30 audits that we did and really looked at, well, what were the common issues that we come across. That doesn't mean any of the other questions won't be answered, but I think we can create sort of separate videos for that don't need to be workshops, and we can share those at a later stage. So today, the 3 big ones are, especially for marketplaces starting out, what platform do I use? And is it a client or a server-side rendering platform, which will have massive impacts on usability, the search engines. And so we'll dive into a little bit of that. We cover sort of the biggest 5 issues that we see when it comes to indexation. So it's the good old search console and people go, Google is just not indexing my content. So we'll chat through a bunch of those. And I think the most common one that got asked in the community was basically migrations and migraines, if you want to put it there, can be quite painful. So let's start things off when we're looking at sort of client versus server-side rendering platforms, right? So in a long time ago, sort of before the JavaScript was a big norm in the website and website development, really the way that Google would look at indexing content would be, hey, there's a URL, we're sitting in the crawl queue, it gets passed to the crawler would crawl the URL, it would place it in the index, and it would then rank it, right? And so that sort of created the first wave of indexing. It was pretty straightforward. Crawl it, indexing it, start again, etc., etc. Pretty decent loop. But then what we got, JavaScript came along, right? And so all of a sudden, search engines were not just required to sort of crawl and understand the HTML, but they were also now needing to understand what happened to a page when JavaScript was inserted in the page and would, and sometimes alter the content, it would pull in different information. So Google could not at that stage understand what JavaScript did because it could be used for so many different things. So what we're looking at now is, you still got your crawl queue. The crawl will still go to your website and it will index the first wave. So the first wave of indexing. But then if it detects sort of JavaScript, when resources are available, it will go through a second wave of indexing where Google would essentially go, great, we've got everythingmarketplaces.com, right? And we've detected some JavaScript. So we'll index what's here now, what we can see in the HTML. But because we don't know yet what this JavaScript does, we'll pass it through a second loop back and go, let's render the page fully when the JavaScript is executed, and then we'll update that index again with that second wave of information. which then would lead to ranking, right? So it's gone from straight HTML to the index to HTML to the index. And if there's JavaScript there, it would loop back, render that page again, and then feed it back. So that's why you sometimes see when you index a new page, you publish a new page, and it's heavily influenced by JavaScript, that Google will index a blank page, or what appears to be like a blank page. And you're going, oh my God, what's happened? It's the end of the world. But then 2 days later, it's like, oh, my content's here. What's going on? That's just basically Google updating that through that second wave of indexing. And then, by default, JavaScript was sort of designed as a client-side rendering platform framework, right? And what that basically meant is that client-side rendering essentially means that the JavaScript is rendered and executed in your browser, and therefore it utilizes your resources rather than those of the web server, right? You can imagine who came up with this: developers, right? Shortcut, we don't want to take all the load, etc. So you guys just deal with it. The problem is, there's some pros and cons for both sides. So we know from a development perspective, client-side rendering is great for the webmaster, for the marketplace. Like it's less load on the web servers. There's less cost for webmasters because they don't have to execute all this JavaScript all the time. But the issues are there's compatibility issues, right? You might be using Chrome. I'm using Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari. There's increased load times because we're, as the browser, as the user, are having to download all these JavaScripts and then have them execute in our browser. So that can sometimes lead to sort of a poor user experience. And this is what leads to sort of potential partial indexing, we call it, right? Because Google essentially is another browser, right? So if Google can't actually load JavaScript well, or it couldn't in the early days, and arguably still is not great at it, it'll just go, there's nothing here, right? We'll just skip it. And you'll see that sort of often with things like drop-down menus or, collapsible content, where in the initial DOM or the initial load of the HTML, there's actually no content. But then when you click on the button, the JavaScript sort of fires that content up, and then all of a sudden it's there. When we look at sort of server-side rendering and why it's so popular, it's because the execution is done on the server, which means there's a faster page experience, it's a better user experience, and it ensures that there's full indexation of the page, right? And this can be done various different ways, various different tools that can achieve this. We won't get into that today. But the big thing here is it's an increased server resource. It's obviously more expensive, and to do server-side rendering out of the box kind of doesn't exist. So it does require some development time. But when you look at Google and what Google is a business, right? So Google's business is crawling and discovering new content. And if you look at the latest sort of Google algorithm updates, they've been really focused, especially this year, on sort of content quality, right? But when you actually think about it, it's Google's way of putting lipstick on a pig, because they're basically saying, hey, we're detecting a lot of crap content here and a lot of thin pages and a lot of technical issues, and we're wasting all of our resources crawling these, paginated pages or e-commerce stores with faceted navigation. And we're sick and tired of paying for that. So here is another update where we tell you that you should create great content. It's all about how helpful your content is. But when you really dig down deep into it, it's Google saying, we really only want to surface great content because we're sick and tired of indexing sites that just blow out our crawl budgets, right? So if you were Google, you can expect that server-side rendering is your preference. And that's why when we deal with a lot of marketplaces and sort of single-page applications, we go, hey, there is actually a very, very good reason for this. And I actually came across an example this morning. A friend of mine pointed out that if you did a site : Disney.com, I think they were using client-side rendering, and all of the title tags was quotes, movie from Disney, title tag. It had used all the variables that it would have coded in, but Google was actually servicing just the general variables. So everything was variable one at Disney.com. So yeah, it can break a lot of things. So when we sort of advise early stage marketplaces, we go, yes, there is a little bit more here in terms of cost for server-side rendering, but as you sort of scale, you better do it now than incur the tech that comes with doing it when you're at scale, right? Because there's never any time. So in this case, Google and SEOs prefer server-side rendering for that reason. The second most sort of asked about question and comes up in audits a lot is, I've got this great marketplace, right? We've rolled out 10,000 pages or 100,000 pages or even 1 million pages. But Google just doesn't seem to index it. We're stuck at this 200, 300,000 or 200 pages indexed, right? So common question, Google is not indexing my content. Big problem. The top 5 common issues that we see from an indexation are, if you have a look, you've probably all seen this screenshot from Google Search Console. And the 5 most common ones are Google has detected an alternative page with a proper canonical tag, and it'll have a big line up and it's all these pages. Google has detected duplicate without a user selected canonical tag. Google has detected duplicate content and therefore Google chose a different canonical tag. Google has crawled your page but just not indexed it yet. And then Google's discovered or crawled your page, but we just haven't indexed it yet, right? And for context, a canonical tag is basically a piece of code that you put on each web page that says, hey, this is the canonical version of this page, or this is the true point zero. This is the source of truth, right? This is the one page that exists that ignore all other pages. So what we look at is, all right, the first one, your alternate page with proper canonical tags. So basically Google has found duplicate pages that are properly canonicalized. So they're basically saying you've done a good job and these pages are set up correctly, but we're still making you aware of them. And 9 times out of 10, there's just really nothing you need to do here. But common issues that cause this is things like back when they had AMP pages, right? You have everythingmarketplaces.com and then everythingmarketplace.com/AMP. And Google's going, well, we see that it's the same page and the canonical tag is there, but we're just letting you know that it's a canonical. UTM tags. So if you're doing any sort of referral marketing or you're trying to track internal links, sometimes mistakenly people will put sort of a UTM parameter in there to kind of track where that click came from. That can create duplicate content. And then, for example, here, a popular Shopify platform, marketplace, where they've basically said, hey, paginated pages. While it is correct, you don't need to do anything here. We've just picked up that, page 6 of the fuel tanks is the same page. You've set it up correctly. We're aware of it. So really all you do is when this becomes an issue is there anything in that URL list that should not be there? Like, for example, we're not going to worry about this because we know pagination is a normal marketplace phenomena, right? Because there's multiple pages of products. So really nothing to worry about. This usually resolves itself and it's not something that Google is actually expecting you to action. A little different one is a duplicate page, but without a user selected canonical tag. So what this means is Google has found duplicate URLs, but you have not specified that this page should really be canonicalized to that page. So if you think about it, if you're selling Nike shoes and you've got size 42, 43, 44, 45, really what you're trying to say is there is not enough unique content on these pages to justify having unique URLs. So every single size page typically has a canonical tag back to the shoe page, because the last thing we want to do is have every single page re-indexed in duplicate content where the only difference is that sort of size, right? And so other things that could obviously cause this are, again, URLs with extensive parameters. So if you've got any sort of search engine on your website that says, hey, when you enter in a service plus location and it does the parameter search, if you let Google index it, Google is going to go, well, hey, there's no canonical tag here. don't know if this is the right page, but we're just going to have a guess, and we're going to say we're going to bang it to this one, right? So this is kind of leaving things in Google's hands. And really the only thing that we go through here is, should this page exist? So if you have a look at some of the URLs that you go through in your search console, does this URL, should that exist? If it does, make sure that it has a proper canonical tag. And if it doesn't, either apply a no index tag or remove it, right? And so what you'll see here is this is a booking platform, and it's got booking staff equals, book with staff equals true. It's an option that allows people to select a particular staff member at that salon. But Google is actually, was indexing that URL separately and going, well, hang on a second, we see this URL here, we think it should be this, but we're not sure. And therefore you get this whole list here, right? Then, but probably the more dangerous one is Google considers the URL as duplicate and has chosen to ignore your canonical URL, and instead it's choosing its own canonical URL. So this is basically saying you've done everything right. You've said, hey, the canonical is this. I know there's a duplication, but we're going to point it to this page, which is the one that should rank. And Google is going, yeah, no, we're just going to choose one anyway, right? And so an example here is a particular salon that is indexed. We've declared that same URL is here. So if you have a look, the referring page is actually the URL. And then we've declared, the user declared canonical tag is self-referencing, where we said, hey, the canonical tag is actually the Polish version or the Poland version here. And that was a mistake on our part. But what Google has then said in this case, hey, we get it. You've selected Poland here, but it's actually just the English version, right? So we quickly picked up on this and sort of fixed that, right? And it's still, these things take time. Google takes time. So we fixed this about 6 months ago, and you can see Google still takes time because this was a screenshot that I just updated yesterday. And common reasons for this issue is sites that have similar language. For example, if you've got a US site, a UK site, and a Canada site that are all in English, but you're targeting different countries and the content on those pages is similar, Google can actually go, hey, hang on a second, this page, even though you're saying it's Canada, it's exactly the same as the UK, exactly the same as the US, Google might try and make a better guess, right? And it can guess wrong. Product pages with minor variants. So again, the shoe example with the different sizes, perfect example. And really what this comes down to is two things, right? When you think about it, when Google sees two pages that are exactly the same, it tries to guess which one it chooses to be the canonical version. And it really just comes down to the two pages lack unique content on those pages. So if the content pages or the content on the pages were vastly different, there's no way that Google would see them as canonical or as the same. And lastly, if it's a new page and you haven't linked to from anywhere on your website, then Google is kind of going, yeah, I know that you're saying that this is the canonical, but actually this page over here, you link to this page far more often than you do to this page. So based on that, we think that that page is more important. So a good way to sort of think about fixing these issues is if it is a consistent issue on the website, ask yourself, is the content on these URLs different enough? Should they be different? And if that's not an issue, am I actually linking to this page anywhere in my website, or am I actually linking to the wrong version, right? And that can usually fix up this issue pretty quickly. And a great way of doing this, Mike, to your comment earlier, is internal linking, obviously super important, but breadcrumbs tend to fix this issue, right? So homepage, category, subcategory, product, or service. If those pages are all linked together, there is no way that Google is actually going to say, well, hey, hang on a second, this product or service all the way over here is something that's not linked to, because it's automatically linked in your breadcrumb structure. So by implementing breadcrumbs, you can technically fix a lot of the issues if it comes down to your linking. Then what we've got is the crawled. So yes, we've crawled your page, but we just haven't added it to the index. And so it is the natural way that Google actually goes about discovering content, right? So if we go back to the example that we had earlier, crawl queue, crawler, processing, index, ranking, basically where you're stuck is the processing area, right? We're processing your requests, we've crawled it, but we just haven't proceeded or progressed you through to the next stage of adding you to our index. 9 times out of 10, if the pages are, have unique content, etc., this will solve by itself over time. If it sticks around, there's usually common issues similar to the ones that we talked about just before. It's either not being linked to from anywhere. So Google is going, well, if you don't link to it from anywhere on your website, it must not be that important, right? It's poor content quality. And when we're saying it's poor content, it's not saying that you can't write. It's either duplicate content, it's thin content, or it's content that's too similar to another page. And the authority, basically, how long has your website been online? The biggest thing we see is we've just launched this great marketplace. We've got 100,000 pages. We're now a week into it and Google just hasn't indexed them all. It's like, well, you're a brand new site. Google is not going to take your word for it that you're a credible supplier, and it's not going to waste its resources on a brand new site trying to index and then render in some cases, in most cases, and dedicate resources to a website that's completely new, right? So sometimes it's just that you have to build some credibility, right? You got to get some cred. And the flip side of it is Google knows about your URLs, but they just haven't been crawled, or we have them in the crawl queue, so they've been discovered. Google has seen it, but we're still stuck at this very early stage, right? We've got them in the queue, but we've not indexed it yet. And a lot of issues, a lot of times when we see this issue, it can be down to server access issues. So Google is trying to hit too many URLs at once, and your server is having a spasm and it's throwing errors because it's getting overloaded. Content overload, basically, exact same example. This happens a lot when you're launching a brand new marketplace with thousands of pages. Google is going to go, hey, I see it, I see you, but show me some indications that you're actually true and you deserve our resources. And then again, lack of internal links or thin, poor, duplicate content, right? Always make sure that you're looking at lack of internal links, content quality as your first options, and then dig deeper into it. 9 times out of 10, you'll solve it because there's duplicate content. There's content that's just too thin. And when I say thin, think about if you had Trulia and Zillow all showing apartments for rent in Long Beach, and they all just show 10 images with a quick description, Google is going to look at that and go, well, that's 10 apartments in Long Beach. And then the next page is 10 apartments in Venice. But all we're seeing is that heading and 10 images. Like, you've got to give us something to work with. So do we need to add more content to the page so that Google understands the context of the page that it's looking at, right? And if you nail these things, so if we go through all common 5 issues, what you'll end up with, is that 9 times out of 10 comes down to content quality, and that being thin content, duplicate content, or poor content, a lack of internal linking, or you're just trying to give Google too much to deal with, and you just got to be patient, right? But like I said, 9 times out of 10, check your content quality and your internal linking, and you'll solve a lot of these issues. And I know there'll be a few questions around this, but just to save time, we'll go on to sort of the last topic that I wanted to chat through today, which was migrations and migraines, right? So website migrations, just so we're all on the same page, we consider them a process where significant changes to your website's domain, platform structure, or design take place, right? So the most common migration types we see in the clients and the world that we deal with is we've got platform migrations, right? So we're moving from Magento to ShareTribe. We're moving from ShareTribe to Marketplace or any of those sort of situations. And they can be quite tricky. And the reason for that is they can be quite tricky because you're dealing with different underlying code bases, right? You could be moving from a HTML-based website that's rendering super fast and super well to one that's super reliant on JavaScript. And there might actually be server-side or client-side rendering. So if you move from something that's HTML-based to client-side rendering using a lot of JavaScript, doing the migration, you might do everything right, but because Google is not seeing all the content because of the JavaScript, it could tank, right? So when you're doing this sort of migration, there's a high risk that things can go wrong if you don't plan accordingly. The second that we see a lot of is domain. So we're going to go from domain A to domain B. Very low risk. If you plan it properly and you just recreating the entire website just on a different name or a different brand, Google takes about 2 to 3 months to completely re-index a domain. But from what we've seen, the long side could be traffic implications from maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then it will usually boost back up. AutoGuru, a perfect example, they used to be called Fixed Price Car Service about 8 years ago. They're now called AutoGuru, but Google has still got Fixed Price Car Service in the index like 8 years later. So there is a lag period, right? The second, I guess, most dangerous one that we see is URL restructures, right? And this is why in the very, very first presentation we did, when you think about building your marketplace, you really got to understand and think about what your URL structure is going to be, because it's a pain in the butt to have to move from, say, product/example to new /product/ category /example. Because what you're doing is, even though the content is exactly the same, it could be on the exact same platform, Google is going, oh, this page no longer exists, but they've given me this new page. So now I'm going to reevaluate, recrawl, re-render, and re-rank that page as if it were a complete new page. And this is often where we see the longest lag when we do migrations, is when we're doing massive sort of URL restructurings. And when I say length of time, you know, we're still sort of in the 6 to 8 week period, right? The fourth is content and design changes. So this commonly goes wrong when you're going, right, we're moving from platform A to B, and we're actually going to rewrite all the content and completely redesign the entire website. And then you do the migration and you go, oh my God, it tanked. What happened? And you go, well, could be a lot of things, right? Content rewrites, reduction or expansion. If you're adding, reducing, or changing content on your page, even without a migration, you'll typically see fluctuations in rankings, right? Because Google is now going, I see new content. I now have to reevaluate that content against what I see in my index and then rank you accordingly to the new content that we've seen. Now, if you do that and you're also changing platforms, it's going, I see all this new content in a completely new context. I can't see some of it because it's JavaScript. And then we've also moved from domain to B, and it's kind of gone, it can cause a lot of issues. So when we say, what we advise is, when you do any sort of migrations, and let's say you're migrating platforms, rebranding, and doing URL restructures, is to do them in stages. Do your platform migration first, make sure that that goes right. Give it 2 months, make sure that, or a month, make sure that the traffic is 0 or going up, right? The best thing we can do is have it stable. If we're confident that that's good, let's look at moving from domain A to domain B, or vice versa, right? And make sure that that's stabilized. Make sure that that has no negative impact. And only then we go, let's do the URL restructures, right? Because if you're doing everything at once, Google is just going to get confused. And the latest one, or the last one in this list, probably the biggest pain in the ass for later stage companies is, mergers and acquisitions. Let's just start with that. Usually a big pain, right? You're acquiring a new company, you're trying to integrate that into your existing company, and there are staff clashes, technology clashes. The same is true for merging domains, right? a big strategy is, well, we're just going to buy out or roll up 4 of our competitors. And you know, Mike, we had a great chat about this the other day. It was kind of like, that makes sense. But you know, from our side, we look at it and go, well, what's the supply side, right? If we're merging 3 the same marketplaces, is there an overlap in supply? But when you're merging multiple domains, you've got to go, well, hang on a second. How do we merge domain A that gets 100,000 visits to domain B that gets 100,000 visits? Maths would indicate that you get 200,000 visits, right? But in reality, when the mergers happen and you're redirecting traffic, it never really adds up one-to-one. And there is all sorts of complications that can arise. So the common migration issues we encounter, and we've got 5 key ones, right? So we go through 5 stages. There's no strategy. Very simple. Why are we migrating? And if we're migrating, what's the strategy behind it? What are the metrics that we're going to look at? Are we migrating for usability, for speed, for indexation? You know, we've got to really understand why are we migrating and what are the metrics that we're going to keep an eye on. Second part is there's no planning. They'll just go, we'll just switch it over, right? And we've encountered that numerous times where on Friday we finish the work week, we have a beer, and we get into the office on Monday and there's a brand new website, and you're going, what? You know, literally what just happened? And they've gone, well, you guys are the SEO guys, that traffic tanked over the weekend, and you know, essentially there's no planning, right? So they haven't thought about mapping redirects, they haven't thought about changing statuses, changing XML sitemaps. You know, we'll get to that in the next slide. The other one is sort of no resources. So, you know, this often happens when you're buying sort of, and this is websites from like an agency, right? A lot of agencies will just go, we'll deliver the new website, and then, well, you haven't paid for the aftercare package. So we push it live, and then they go, well, see you later. And then you go, well, hang on a second, there's all these issues. And they go, well, you have to have an aftercare package, and then we can have resources available. So when you're actually planning a migration, allow 2 days either side to make sure that you've got resources available to jump on it quick, right? If you're early stage, not that much of a problem. If you're dealing with a website that gets 500,000 visitors, you want to make sure that you protect that, right? And then the 2 big ones that come with the no resources is pre-migration testing and post-migration testing. Test everything that you would normally test on your staging side. Pretend it's the live side, break it, try and do everything, go through your checklists, and make sure that it stacks up. And then do the same thing once it's done. It's a difference between what the Body Shop did when they did their website migration versus what Lush did. And they kind of said, oops, we forgot about, we redirected all the pages except for sort of the shop. And so that was driving the traffic, and you're going, okay, well, Google won't necessarily go, you've now made it available, we'll fix it. Once Google has sort of seen that drop, you could be waiting months for that to come back. And rather than go through every single step that we've outlined here, because there is so much, what we've done is we've actually got a spreadsheet that we use internally that I've given to Mike, and he'll make that available sort of in the recap here. So you can actually go through the various stages, right? You go through your planning stages. You set a start date, an end date, and who in your team owns it, and when are you planning that? Your pre-migration, right? If you're a marketplace or you've got a nice number of organic traffic, or you've got good traffic numbers, you want to make sure that you collect as much data from the current site, and make sure that your images, your body content, everything else, you've kind of got a backup and you know what's happening, so that when you get to the next stage, which is the post-migration, it's sort of aligned, right? And then further down the list, I think there's about 75 different items that we run through before you hit that go live button. And really, even when everything goes right, it can still go so wrong, right? The biggest thing that we've seen is too many changes at once. We're changing brand, content, and the way we lay out stuff. Yeah, that's going to be an issue. The other thing is, which is not often talked about, because a lot of domain names and catchy names have obviously been re-registered, or domain names have been registered before, is actually doing due diligence on the name that you're buying, right? Take MicroAcquire as an example. MicroAcquire.com recently bought Acquire.com for $2 million. Now, if they hadn't done their due diligence and realized that Acquire.com had a whole bunch of spammy backlinks, and it used to be a spam website, when they do this migration, like patient.co.uk to patient.info, everything can be done right. But if that domain is already tarnished in Google's sort of indices, everything you do is great, but Google is still going to remember that penalty that sits with that website, right? It's very hard to overcome that. And the last thing is, the migration doesn't stop deceleration. If unfortunately your marketplace is facing deceleration and you're going, look, the only thing that we can do is sort of change platforms, that doesn't necessarily change anything, right? If you're already on a downward trend, migrating a platform is not going to stop that whatsoever. And then 4 could just be super bad timing, right? You're doing it in the middle of a sale. You're doing it on the Thursday before Black Friday. Yeah, things can go wrong, right? So overall, I think you guys will get a lot of information from this checklist, and I think it will answer a lot of your questions. And obviously in the thread, if there's any questions about particular items on here or how to execute it, pop it in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to sort of answer anything in the thread. That's it.
This is an incredible workshop. So thanks for walking us through it there, Mike. Hey, so actually we had a question here. I believe Brian posted when you were discussing, how long pages could remain kind of like stuck in the state of being crawled but not indexed.
So if they're crawled, they're not indexed. If you've gone through and said, hey, is my content an issue? Is my internal linking an issue? If there's no underlying issues and we've ticked all those boxes, depending on how new you are or how much content you've pushed live in that second wave, we've seen it take up to a couple of months.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah. So just a quick one. Sorry, before I forget, this is what we talked about just earlier when I was actually going through this presentation. There is a way, and technically Google says you can't use it for this because you can only use it for, I think it's videos and jobs, but they've got what's called the Google Indexing API. And you can actually pass URLs through there, even though they're not jobs or images. And we've tested this like today, and our index pages went live on a test site from like 2 to 50. A site that's been live 24 hours.
Yeah, interesting. I'll have to include a little bit more about that in the recap notes. So
yeah, I will.
Yeah. So I know there was a lot that we had covered on this. So we might have to kind of digest it and continue the conversation in the community with some questions. But if anyone, we've got a few more minutes here. So if anyone has any questions and wants to come on, feel free to.
Yeah, I think Michael, while everyone's probably thinking, I think Michael from Motor Hunt had put a question in the thread that said, should we allow Google to index sort of category pages and what he called, I think, leaf pages, right? And I think we got Michael here. So maybe, Michael, you want to jump in on sort of what you meant by that.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So what I meant is, we're a motorcycle marketplace. So our category pages usually have a brand name like Honda something like that, or you can say, Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic. Think of it like that. But a lot of the listings themselves, the actual cars for sale, let's say, are also of that particular model. So the idea here is that if we have a category page for, let's say, Honda Civics, but another, 50 Honda Civic cars for sale, does that confuse Google when the user is trying to find Honda Civics for sale? Right? We want them to be going to the category page. We don't want them to go to this 50 Honda Civic page, cars. Correct. And I think for marketplaces, that's what I mean by lead. It's like the actual person or item for sale or whatever.
Yeah. And I think it's a super good question, right? So in your context of classifieds, we've actually done a lot of testing with this, right? And there is the argument of Zillow that has access to all the houses, but you don't necessarily want all the houses indexed, right? or the houses
Yes.
themselves might not necessarily get a lot of traffic. Now, in
Right.
certain cases, yeah, people look for streets and all that sort of stuff. But in your case, in cars, for example, we've tested both ways. We've tested allowing Google to index every single listing page. And we've, on the flip side, said, hey, just index our search result pages, but don't index any of the content, like any of the leaf pages. And we've effectively saw no change, really, right? Because unless, when you got in real estate and they're looking, I want to live on, Sunset Boulevard, when you're dealing with cars, really the pages that are driving traffic are your Honda Civics for sale or your Honda Civics for rent or whatever pages, right? The individual ads don't actually get traffic from an organic perspective. So whether or not you index that with Google isn't technically going to make a difference, because that page never was there to rank in the first place, right? So I'm not saying de-index everything. Both sides are okay as long as there's enough signals from your leaf pages back to your category pages to say, well, hey, this is the page that we want to index. The example in your industry, Matula, right? It only generates search results pages. It doesn't actually own the leaf pages because it's just a click out. And so they're able to rank well just by the search result pages and permutations. So to answer your question in a nutshell, it doesn't matter whether you do or don't. There won't be much of a difference in organic traffic uptick or deceleration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Davey, do you want to jump on? See you raise your hand.
Yes, thanks a lot. Mike, thank you very much for the insight. As usual, super helpful. I have a quick question based on what you mentioned during the presentation. So you talk about this URL that like the Polish version of the website of a page. But I thought that the language was a unique content by itself. So if you have two URLs, one is in French, one in Polish, one in German, I thought that every single page was actually different than other because of the language.
Yeah.
So how can we end up having a situation where Google's going to think that the URL is actually the same, where the whole content of the page is actually completely different?
Yeah. So good question. In our case, what had happened is there was actually a bug that said on the English page, the canonical URL is the Polish page. So what we were trying to do, the bug was trying to say this English version is exactly the same as the Polish version. And that overrode the underlying issue where we're saying what's called a hreflang tag, where you indicate to Google, hey, we're in 5 different languages, here's all the alternatives. So it actually read the code and said, well, this directive takes precedence over this directive, and you're trying to say that the English version is the Polish version, which it's not, and therefore got confused. And it was a bug that we picked up, right? But normally, you would say, hey, these are the alternative language pages, and Google won't actually treat that as duplicate content. Google will, in a nutshell, say, well, this is one page, it's just in 5 different languages, but for argument's sake, we're going to treat it as one page.
Get it. Thank you very much.
No problems.
Awesome. That's a good question, Davey. So, well, cool. So we
and one probably good for a video to dive into hreflang tags when any of your marketplaces are dealing with sort of multi-country or multilingual marketplaces. Yeah, we could probably do another whole hour just on that alone.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out, because I know we have about probably 40 or 50 in the community that are. So
yeah, sure.
Maybe we'll do a post there after. But yeah, Mike, once again, thanks for joining us. So this is this is packed with so much great insights here on the workshop today. Not only today, but also the series. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and I'll walk us through everything. So and thanks everyone for joining in on the series and the great questions. And I'll be sure to post a recap in the community with the recording, some notes, and then also link to some of the resources that Mike shared, like the migration checklist. So
awesome. I appreciate everyone for attending. And thanks. Thanks all for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.